Hello there fellow cake friends, and welcome to this week's tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to make the Stephanotis flower, which is a beautiful little filler flower that can be so versatile in different kinds of bouquets from classic to modern. And I'm going to show you how to make them out of gum paste today. If you're new here, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up when you're ready to go, and let's get to the tutorial. We're going to make both the Stephanotis flower and bud today. This is a great little filler flower for white arrangements or even beautiful on its own. Since this is a gum paste flower, you will of course start with a batch of my classic white gum paste, and I will put the tutorial link where I show you how to make it in the top right corner of this video, as well as in the description box below. So you'll start with 24 gauge wires. You will also need gum glue, shortening, needle nose pliers that double as wire cutters, small scissors, a dull blade tool, a cone tool, and a piece of styrofoam or something to stick your flowers in as they dry. I'm going to start by cutting the 24 gauge wires into thirds. Next, you will hook one end of the wires and then close the hook. Put a small amount of shortening onto your hand so that the gum paste doesn't stick, and knead it until it's soft and stretchy. Between using the gum paste, make sure you keep it covered. I'm going to keep it just under this plastic container, and we'll start with a blueberry-sized piece of gum paste. Think of a normal blueberry, not one of those scary giant ones that you can see these days. Roll it into a tight and smooth ball on the palm of your hand. Then, using your pinky finger, roll the gum paste back and forth on your palm so it starts to look like an uneven dumbbell shape. The bottom half should be thinner and the top half should look like a small bulb. Hold the larger end and grab your cone tool. Dip it in a small amount of shortening so it doesn't stick to the gum paste, then insert it into the gum paste, working it up the cone slightly. This is going to be a really similar technique to when I showed you guys how to make the lilac flowers. Next, grab your small scissors and you'll make 5 cuts evenly around the lip to create your 5 petals. Open up the blossom with your finger. Then you'll begin by pinching the squared corners of each petal and then flattening the petal. To create a bit more length on each petal, your thumb will be moving away from the blossom and your index finger will be moving towards it slightly. Then you'll just repeat with all 5 petals and make them as even as possible. So if you take a look at the bottom of the flower, you can see I still have that little bulb at the bottom, which is exactly what you want for the Stephanotis. Using the very tips of your fingers, pinch the top half of the petal to a point. You can see a different angle here. I'm just gently coaxing the sides of the petals backwards in order to create the point. And continue doing the same thing on the remaining petals. Comment below and tell me what your favorite filler flower is. I love these Stephanotis for their classic look, but I also have tutorials for lilacs and cherry blossoms and spray roses, all of which I will link to in the description box below. So you will grab your cone tool once more, and I'm just adding a little bit more depth into the center. Then I will grab a wire and dip the hooked end of the wire into my gum glue. Then insert the unhooked end directly down the center of the blossom, just feeding it gently, making sure it goes right down the middle. And just allow it to come just below the center so that you can kind of pinch the top close so you can no longer see the wire. And now I'm just rolling the part just beneath the blossom, the kind of tapered end, between my fingers, which is giving it the shape of the Stephanotis flower. And doing this rolling motion also helps secure it to the wire so it doesn't move anywhere once it's dried. and you will be left with your blossom on top and then a tapered end and kind of like a teardrop shape at the bottom. You might have to adjust your petals a little bit so they look fairly flat, and then you can allow this to dry upright for 24 hours. I'm going to show you one more really quick here so you can see the shape once more. So roll your blueberry sized piece of gum paste into a smooth ball, then roll it back and forth with your pinky finger to create a thicker and a thinner bulbous end with a thinner area in the middle. In the fatter end, insert your cone tool and work the gum paste up gently and evenly. Cut the lip into 5 even pieces and open up the blossom. Pinch and flatten each petal. If any of your petals smush together, just cut them open again using your scissors. Pinch the tips of each petal to create a point on each one. And reinsert your cone tool in the center before grabbing your wire, dipping it into the gum glue in the hooked end, and then feeding that all the way through your blossom until it can no longer be seen at the very top. Roll the narrow area between your fingers and make sure it's really nice and secure onto the wire. And once you're happy with the shape, allow this to dry for 24 hours. Next, we'll make the buds. Roll a slightly smaller piece of gum paste on your palm into a tight ball, just like we did with the blossoms. So you'll repeat the rolling with your pinky finger to divide the gum paste into a thinner bulbous end and a thicker one. Next, you will dip the hooked end of one wire into gum glue and insert it into the narrow end of your bud. In order to secure the bud, I will roll the narrower part between my fingers, and I'm also going to be narrowing and shaping that area. I like the hooked end to be all the way up into the thicker part of the bud so it's very secure. Work the fatter end into a delicate point. Grab your dull blade tool and press it from the base of the bud to the very tip, 5 times around in total. After this, I will reshape the tip if necessary, and the entire bud if anything's gone out of shape or been pressed a bit too much, and then I will allow this to dry for 24 hours next to my flowers. Tell me in the comments below what flowers you would pair these stephanotis with. I would love to hear your arrangement ideas. I am going to be arranging these with roses in white and red for an upcoming wedding this weekend. And I will show you one more quickly so you can get the hang of it. Roll a slightly smaller size of gum paste than you did for your flowers into a tight ball on the palm of your hand, then roll it back and forth using your pinky finger to divide it into one thinner and one fatter end. Dip the hooked end of a wire into gum glue and insert it into the thinner part of your bud so that the hook end ends up in the fatter part near the top. Thin out the center area and reshape the base if it got a bit smushed up, and taper the top into a gentle point. Press the dull knife tool from the base of the bud to the very tip 5 times around. Reshape as necessary and allow to dry for 24 hours. The last element we'll be making for this arrangement are the leaves. I have a grooved cell board and a piece of about 30 grams of gooseberry gum paste. I'll have links to all the tools and ingredients I'm using here in the description box below. I'll roll this into a log and then press it out so it covers 3 of the grooves. Next, I will roll it nice and thin using a small rolling pin. Make sure when you're rolling on one of these groove boards, you are only rolling in the same direction as the grooves are running. Next, you will peel the gum paste off, and I'm using a small oval cutter that I've bent slightly on one end to make a gentle point. With this, I will cut 3 leaves, making sure that the grooves are running straight down the middle of the oval from base to tip, with the slightly pointed end being at the top or narrower end of the groove. I am cutting a 24 gauge wire into thirds, and I will dip one end of the wires into the gum glue and then wipe off the excess on the back of my hand. Feed the end of the wire with the gum glue into the base of your leaf, going about 1/3 of the way up the leaf. Then pinch around the wire to secure it and flip it over so that the groove side faces downward. I will then repeat this with the remaining leaves. Using your medium ball tool, soften the edges of each of your leaves. You really just want to get rid of that cut raw edge. You don't really need to thin too much or ruffle them. And I'm going to pull down the bottom of the leaves just a tiny bit and pull up the tip a tiny bit as well. Hopefully you can see that clearly here. Next, I'm just using a simple one-sided veiner. You can use a two-sided one if you have it, of course. This one is a maple leaf veiner. I'll press it onto one leaf, making sure that the center vein is going right down the middle of the leaf. And then I'm giving it a really good press so it gets a really nice good impression, and then peeling that off. Then I will repeat this with the remaining two leaves. So making sure it is really right down the center, just taking my time and then giving it a nice firm press to get a great impression and peeling it off. So to shape your leaves, first I'm going to bend it in half so the vein part will be bending in on itself. And then after that, I'm going to pull the outsides of the leaves so they can curve outwards. But I do want to keep that center fold there. And then I'm going to allow this to dry on a piece of bumpy foam, or you could use a piece of bent tin foil or whatever you have. So again, folding that leaf right in half, then taking the edges while keeping that center fold intact and folding those outwards, then allowing this to dry. Once everything has dried for a minimum of 24 hours, you are ready to dust and bring everything to life. I have 3 flat brushes and 1 really tiny brush, which I'm going to use for the centers. The petal dusts I'm using are crimson, caramel, foliage green, moss green, and black or charcoal. I have all my dried flowers here, both the buds and the blossoms, so you can get a better sense of what the shape is like as soon as they're dried. You can see that nice tapered center, and then the little teardrop end, and then the blossom on top. These are going to look so great as soon as we dust them and bring them to life in just a second. And here are my dried leaves. They have dried also for 24 hours, and the veining looks really nice in this light, and it will come out even more once we dust it. So I will start as always with some cornstarch on my parchment paper, and I'm using one of my flat brushes and pulling a little bit to the side. I'm going to try and achieve a gradient color from the base to just under the blossom, and then I'm going to put a touch of color in the center as well. So I will start with a touch of the moss green just above my cornstarch area that I've put aside. And then I will put aside a little bit more cornstarch for a darker green color that I will create with a couple different colors, including the moss green. And then I'm going to add some of the black or charcoal. And lastly, I will add some of that foliage green. So I'm just mixing this up together so it makes a homogeneous color. And I'll just keep mixing and mixing, then adjust the color as needed. So I'm adding a little bit more charcoal. This darker green color will be going at the very, very base of the flower, and then I'm going to have it in a gradient towards the moss green and then the white blossom at the top. So it's really cool right now, and I will add a little bit of caramel to warm it up a tiny bit so it looks nicer with the moss green. Now I'm going to mix up the moss green with the cornstarch that I have there. I'll take a touch of caramel and put that aside. This is going to be going kind of in little streaks around the flower, and also in the very center I will add just a touch of caramel. I find it just warms the flower and gives it more depth. And lastly, I'm going to take a bit of that caramel that I've already diluted and add a touch of the crimson to it. Some of the Stephanotis flowers have kind of a pinkish, reddish streak on the base of them, and I just really like the look of that, and I think it will make it look very realistic if we can add that in too. So I'm going to start with the moss green, and I'm going to dust that up the entire base of the flower. I will start at the very, very base so that the color can be a bit more concentrated there, and then feather up into a gradient so that it's not a stark line where it starts and ends. Next, I will switch brushes and go to that darker green color, and I'm going to concentrate this on the very, very base of the flower. So I rotate the flower as I dust so that it's even all the way around. And you can see that nice gradient that's appearing. Next, I'm going to grab a bit of that caramel color and just dust a couple spots on the flower. I always find that it looks more realistic when you can add a bit of warmth into your flowers. And don't worry if a touch gets on the tip of a petal or anything, it'll just make it look more natural. So I'll grab my tiny brush and I just add a touch of that caramel into the very center. And the flower is almost done. I will just add those tiny pink marks I was talking about, or the red marks. And I think that is perfect. So we're moving on to the buds, and I'm going to dust the moss green on basically the entire thing. If anything, I will leave the very, very tip untouched, but for the most part, it is going to have a very, very light green color to it. Switching again to my dark green, I will concentrate it at the base, but I am going to allow it to come just a little bit higher than the blossoms because the buds do have a lot more green in them. So I will just dust this upwards, but try not to get too much on the top of the bud part. Now to add a touch of warmth with the caramel, just gently dust this in a couple spots. It should barely be noticeable, but it will help make it look more realistic. And there you go, your bud and your blossom all complete. And here are all of my flowers finished before taping and arranging. Now we will dust our leaves quickly. These shouldn't take very long at all. I'm going to start with that dark green color, and I'm going to make it an even more saturated dark green by adding foliage, and I'm going to be adding the charcoal. So in order to make it a more saturated color, I won't be adding as much cornstarch as I did before. I will leave the dust a little bit less diluted, but I do always want to add just a touch of cornstarch because it helps it apply more smoothly onto your flowers and not end up with those streaky, gross areas. So I am happy with the way this color looks. I will load up my brush with it, and I'm going to start brushing in only one direction. And with the leaf, to help out with the shadows, I'm going to try and concentrate a lot of the dust right in the middle and then on the edges as well. I mean, I am dusting the entire leaf, but that is where you want the most saturated areas to be. So you can see the before and after here. It does give it a lot more color. and a lot more of those shadows. And I will give it just a touch of dust onto the veining of the back leaf and on the edges too. Even though we won't really be seeing this, I always add a bit of color just in case. Okay, now we will be taping our flowers together. So I'm going to be using half-width dark green floral tape. I'm just cutting it here in half using my floral tape cutter. Don't forget to stretch your tape to activate it. Then I'm going to start about 1 centimeter down from the base, roll it loosely, and then push it all the way up to the top of the leaf, and then continue rolling down a couple inches. And I'm just going to do this with all of my leaves, and it's okay that there's an empty space at the bottom because we are going to be taping them together, so it will be covered up then. Now we will arrange our flowers. So I like to arrange these almost all at the same level, but just slightly off so that they can overlap each other a bit. And the buds, I like to come just a little bit above the blossoms so that they kind of poke out. So I'm going to be arranging blossoms and buds of larger groups, I would say 7, 8, or 9, and then I will do some smaller groupings as well. I like to have a variance of group sizes because then I'll have more flexibility when it comes to arranging them onto my cake. So I will grab those together and then I will just tape it down really firmly so that none of those are moving anywhere as soon as I'm inserting them into a cake and using them. And if your flowers look a bit too claustrophobic, just kind of bend the wires out a little bit and that should help give them a bit more space to breathe. So I will show you one of the smaller arrangements. This is my last one. So I have 2 buds and 2 flowers here. And you can see they're almost at the exact same level, just a little bit of overlap. And I'm taping these firmly down the stem. And here are all of my flowers, which I will be arranging onto a wedding cake this weekend for a client. And as I said before, it will be going with roses and it will be a red and a white theme. If you are watching this shortly after it comes out, you can check out my Instagram next week and see how the cake turned out. Thank you for watching, and I hope you give this little stephanotis flower a try. If you do, please tag me on social media at Finespun Cakes everywhere. You can download the full tool and ingredient list that I used for this entire tutorial in the description box below. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel before you head out, and I'll see you next time.